Thank you so much, Mark, for taking the time. I know we discussed before we started that we have approximately 1 hour. So you just let us know when, it's time to end because you have other things to do.
It's okay. Hello, everybody.
And I don't know, should I, the introduction of Marc Bekoff is huge. I already sent you all the information. I'm sure everyone here knows.
Forget it. I'll start
That's,
anytime you want.
that's why everyone wanted the recording, because not everyone is able to be here tonight. But now you can actually ask Mark any questions about his
Oh,
book.
you don't want me to start talking and introduce? Let me say a few introductory words, okay?
Sure.
Yeah, and then because I'd love to hear questions. So it's good to see you all. I don't know what countries you're in, but I live in Boulder.
Right in the chat. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So I live in Boulder, Colorado, and I was telling Eva and Lisbeth, that's my view. So that's what I'm looking at. It's a pretty place. So if you ever come over to the States, come to Boulder. Yeah, so I know we're gonna talk a lot about all things dogs, but really the reason I wrote Dogs Demystified was to really make it easy for people to become fluent in dog or dog literate, so they could really understand what their dog and other dogs are saying, if you will. And my training is in ethology. And so for me, there's no substitute for learning about dogs and other animals, because I've done field work on coyotes and wolves and penguins in Antarctica. There's no substitute other than watching them carefully. And I know a lot of people don't do that. And I know I spend a lot of time in dog parks around the country, but around Boulder where I live. And one of my great joys is teaching people how to become citizen scientists and to watch their dogs. And it's amazing how so many people, because everyone, it seems, has some sort of mobile phone or iPhone or whatever they have, people will take videos and I'll tell them to analyze the videos and then they'll send them to me. So that's really the reason I wrote it. I just really think a lot of difficulties, sometimes really major problems, could be solved when people really understand their dog. They know the dog as a unique individual with a unique personality. Not all dogs are the same. And they'll understand that dogs came from wolves, and so they have wolf genes, and they've got neural pathways in their brains that are still wolf, if you will. So that, and then the other reason I wrote it, and I actually made a list of things here because I get tired of people spreading myths and lies about dogs. And I'm sure you all do too. But some of the myths is, that dogs are our best friends. Dogs aren't our best friends. There's rampant dog abuse globally. Another myth is dogs are unconditional lovers, that they'll love us no matter what we do. And I'm sure you all know that that's another myth. It sells books, but it really misrepresents who dogs are. Other myths are dogs live in the present, which I think is one of the dumbest things I've ever heard, because we know that the way in which a dog was reared, for example, could really influence how they're socialized and their physical capabilities nutritionally, and as well as sort of just the development of their brain. There's just a whole lot here. Another one that's very contentious. There's a lot of debate about it, but I don't really think there is. That last week I got an email from a woman who wanted me to dispel the myth of alpha dogs. And as an ethologist, I said, no, there are alpha dogs, there are alpha wolves. It's just that people have no idea what they're talking about when they talk about alpha animals, because alpha doesn't necessarily mean aggressive or dominant. And wolf packs have alpha individuals. So I wrote her back and I explained it to her, and I never heard from her again. So maybe it's just one less thing for me to have to do, but I think that's a myth. So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but if people have questions, that's really great. Because yeah, I always learn from the people with whom I'm talking. So any
So
questions, or should I keep rolling?
there's no questions so far, but I can just let you know, Mark, that in the chat we have people introducing themselves from Munich, Germany, South Carolina, in your own country, the
Wow.
Netherlands, Poland, Denmark, UK, New York City, Norway, Switzerland, Estonia, Belgium. Yeah, all over the place. So if
Well,
any,
we could make this the United Nations of dogs.
exactly, and
That'd be
Sweden
great.
too.
Yeah,
The
I mean, if there are no questions, I can just continue on a few minutes, because I mean, I don't want to say anything that, with which people, well, I mean, you can disagree. I don't want to offend anybody, but I do think that it's the prevalence of myths in all aspects of dog behavior and dog-human relationships that cause major problems for the dogs. Another thing that I think is important, I wrote a book with my colleague and friend Jessica Pierce called A Dog's World. What would the world be like for dogs without humans? And so what happens a lot of times is people generalize from homed dogs to the behavior of free-ranging and feral dogs. So I've been with free-ranging dogs a lot, and home dogs are really very much captive dogs. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, I think most people I know do the best they can by living with a dog in the middle of Barcelona or Oslo or New York City or wherever they are. But it's still a very limited life, because people will say to me, well, dogs don't feel guilt. Dogs don't have the capacity to do certain things. And I'm thinking, gosh, I just saw it 50 times this morning with 40 dogs who were running free and going crazy at one of the local dog parks. So we need to be very careful generalizing about the behavior of dogs in general across the board from the behavior of dogs who have very constrained city lives, urban lives.
So I have a question, Mark, and if anyone has questions and they want to unmute themselves, please raise your hand
Yeah,
on,
please do.
and then I'll let you in. Why do you think it's so difficult to get rid of the dominance myth? Why is that so strong? I mean, yeah.
No,
What's your take on that?
it's a great question, Lisbeth. I mean, the stuff the material I've written about it usually comes to the fact that people don't understand it, and they think that because dogs dominate other dogs, or there's an alpha dog and a beta dog and lower ranking dogs and wolves, that they do it by aggressively. And that's why you read a lot of stuff about people write, I'm the alpha, I'm the leader of the pack. So I think that a lot of people are afraid, because I've gotten emails, some of them are rather nasty, saying that, well, I'm the alpha, and that gives me permission, if you will, to treat my dog in some really horrific ways, dominating them physically or hitting them or shocking them or doing the things that Cesar Millan does to dogs. No, I mean, really, a lot of animals settle their dominance or social relationships very peacefully, because I mean, if I'm a high-ranking wolf and I fight with other wolves and I get hurt, then it really harms me. In English, we'll say something like, well, I won the battle, but I lost the war, because I might be injured, and I may not be able to do the things I need to do every day, or reproduce and make more children, if you will. So I think it's really vastly misunderstood, because I've had people say to me, well, if dogs dominate other dogs, then it's okay for me to dominate them when I'm teaching or training them. I mean, that's why. The other thing is because early on, when I started doing this work, there was a guy whose name I can't remember, but it's a good name to forget, was writing all these papers about how animals in general don't form dominance relationships. And I mean, I just thought it was the stupidest thing I've ever read in my life. So that's why I think if you understand what the word dominance and the word alpha means, and one of the best examples is a man named Rick McIntyre, who's just written 4 books, and he's got a 5th one coming out about the wolves in Yellowstone, the reintroduced wolves. And 3 or 4 of his titles have the word alpha in it, because he understands that there are leaders, but a lot of their behavior, once again, and the conflicts they have are solved peacefully, not by fighting and injuring one another. So if that, ask questions about it. I think it's a really important thing, because there's no animal I know, and I know a lot about different animals, where there aren't alpha, if you will, higher ranking animals. We can get rid of the word alpha if people prefer. But once again, if you look across species, there's been the evolution of a lot of different behavior patterns, like submission and appeasement. Just watch dogs, so that fighting doesn't occur. And the other reason I just alluded to was, you have somebody like Cesar Millan, who wants to be the alpha, but he does it by harming and abusing dogs. What can I say?
Because that myth is probably one of the most harmful myths we have,
Mm-hmm.
Why
do you think that?
Because it allows people to, or the people think it allows them to be mistreating their dogs.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Mary's got her hand up.
I think she's just applauding.
Oh, okay. I don't have any idea with all these little icons. At most of my meetings, people just start shouting. Yeah, you're right, Lisbeth. That really is what comes of it. But the other message in my book, and I'm sure you all know this, but is, dogs are mammals. I mean, it sounds like something, dumb to say, but dogs are mammals. We're mammals. And once again, they come from wolves. They have common ancestors, and they're highly social animals. And there's just no examples of social mammals, birds, fishes, amphibians, reptiles, even insects, in which among the different animals, say in a group, a pack, a herd, a brood of birds, where there isn't some form of social relationships, because social relationships are really important for the integrity of the group, the coherence of a group. And I don't know how many of you all have watched groups of free-ranging dogs, but like I said, I've done it in the mountains. I had a student study feral dogs in the southwestern United States, in Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado. And they behave like wolves. They form wolf packs, packs that resemble wolf packs. There's no way that a group of non-humans or humans are going to be able to function smoothly without some social relationships that are negotiated peacefully.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and then Mary raised her hand as well. So let me just take the first question in the chat, and then Mary, and then I'll go back to the chat. I want to get it in the right order. So the first one is from Linda. She's writing, won't the leader usually also be the parent of most of the group, so that the alpha is more a parent and a protector than a bossy leader?
Yeah, very often it's the case. That's a really good point, Linda, because it could be the case, and it could be because the presence of, well, a parent, or oftentimes it's just the mother, but it could be the father who's around, like in the coyotes we've studied and the wolves I've seen. And you're right. So you could look at it that way. And what I like about the question is that you often, when you watch groups of dogs who are free to be able to do the things that they want to do, or wild animal or free ranging animals, they will be the leader. So one aspect of dominance, and you could call them, alpha individuals, is they control the use of space, for example. They have more freedom of movement. And that would be, in certain situations, you could call them the leader. Exactly. Yeah.
So I just want to add Melissa from the chat
Sure.
then, because it's very related. Sorry, Mary, it's your turn in just a second. She writes that, would you say that they are diplomatic in their relationships, trying to find the best solution of the pack, for the pack?
Yeah, I would. And I really like that, because I think one of the things I've written a lot about, and Jessica and I wrote a lot about it in A Dog's World, is that it's my feeling that, and I think it applies to humans and a lot of animals, that the more agency you have, that's the English word people use, the more freedom you have to be who you are and to negotiate social relationships, the happier you are. I mean, I'm cutting through the chase and skipping a lot of steps, but yeah, I do think that's exactly right. And so in a group of dogs, it could be a more permanent group, like I've seen in just running around in the mountains or on the plains, or it could just be a temporary group at the say at a local dog park or a running trail. These animals, these individuals know their place, so you don't have to worry about being a quote lower ranking animal in the group, because it doesn't mean that other individuals are going to beat you up. It just means that you've got a tight, cohesive group. And you can't have a wild pack of wolves or coyotes, for example, if they're all high ranking. And it's just like with humans. If you look at human groups, you could say, well, somebody is dominating the conversation or something, or people, we've all been in groups where you look up to the leader because he or she knows more than you do. So, right, I think that when there's a fairly well-defined, I hate the word hierarchy, but I think now you all know how I'm using it, hierarchy, it really makes the group function much more smoothly.
Yeah. Okay, Mary, do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question? Or do you want me to read the question in the chat? There you
No,
are.
hi, yeah. Sorry, thanks, Elizabeth. No, I had read the book In Defense of Dogs by John Bradshaw, and he writes in there that the whole idea of the alpha wolf was actually debunked because it was they were observing wolves in captivity who weren't members of the family. And I was just wondering what you thought about that. I mean, going back to like I think the 1920s even.
Yeah, he's wrong in the sense that all of Rick McIntyre's work and other people's work is based on wild wolves. So I mean, he knows a lot about dogs, but it wasn't debunked. And the other thing, and maybe this is beyond what anybody really cares about, but in the early writings about debunking the presence of alpha individuals or dominant individuals, they quote from a man named L. David Meach, who wrote a book in 1970 called The Wolf. So he's really he's a legacy. And they misquoted him. And I know this because I wrote a paper about this maybe 10 or 15 years ago. They misquoted him. And Dave is a friend of mine, and we've talked about it. But what he was basically saying was maybe it would be better not to use those terms because of the way in which they're misused and misinterpreted. So, yeah, I mean, I know that. So, and once again, I've been told, not by John Bradshaw, but by others over the years, that they know that there are higher ranking and lower ranking dogs within a group, but they don't really like to write about it, just because, once again, it gives some people, maybe they're deranged people, the license to just abuse their dog and say, well, alpha wolves beat everyone up in the pack. I'm the alpha human, so I can beat up my dog. And that's the function of, or the downside, if you will, of the myth. Yeah.
Okay, Evie, you have a question? Evie is one of our teachers. She's in Greece.
Hi,
Nice.
so nice to meet you and be here.
Nice
So our approach is all about agency, and we really stand for ethical ways. The difficulty is that we cannot have standard behaviors. So we know, all the science behind dog training and behavior, and why we should and can treat them very nice. But with our clients and the people we talk to who care about the animals, we cannot, say that the dogs will behave in a standard way. So we will have standard results. So how can we, and especially in Greece that we have free living dogs, it's even more difficult to convince people to treat them in a kind way and offer agency and freedom. So, I understand that when we share the knowledge, we also share great responsibility to people, because they understand how they behave has influences the environment. But how can we really, create this safe environment where we are also safe and the dogs have their freedom?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure. I mean, one thing's for sure that I do know, just because I've watched dogs. I mean, I've seen packs of dogs in East Africa and India and China, for example. They differ a lot. And so one, and I hate to say this because I don't know the details of, or the context of what you're seeing in Greece, but what I said before, I really feel this way. And I haven't watched dogs all over the world, in any sense of the word. But I think when dogs feel safe and they trust their human, and they're given the freedom to express themselves in ways, I mean, not fighting necessarily, but in ways that allow them to express their dogness, if you will, that really goes a long way. And the only example I can give you, just not, once again, because I've not seen the dogs in Greece, is when I go to dog parks, and I've been to them all over the place, I tell people, will ask me, like, do you think this is safe? There's a new dog in town, or the play is getting really rough. And I'm not 100% correct, but what I say also is, especially for dog-dog interactions, let them try to work out their social relationships. And that gets back to, the behavior of wild, free-ranging dogs and wild canids, for example. You'll see something that's frightening, and you're going, oh my goodness gracious, they're going to kill one another or harm one another. And the fact is, they resolve the conflict relatively peacefully. I mean, dogs bite one another and they growl, and sometimes they'll nip somebody or knock another dog over, but that's all part of being a dog. But I do think that when a dog feels safe, in their surroundings, that will lessen the likelihood of there being some kind of aggressive encounters. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, you're asking a great question. But another message in the book, just returning to what Evie was saying, is that it's so hard sometimes to come up with general rules because dogs are individuals. And in my field work on coyotes over almost 9 years, you'll see a change in the composition of a coyote pack, which changes the entire social dynamics of the pack, and it can be a new one in town comes in and joins the pack, or one leaves and stuff. So all the generalizations, as we say in English, go out the door.
I have another question. I have so many questions. Please, everyone, write your questions in the chat. I have a
Buy me
question.
lunch and I can stay here for another hour. No, or I'll go grab lunch.
We are a very international community, and I think my
I
question
know
is,
it could be breakfast and it could be dinner for you all. Well, in Spain, they don't eat dinner till like midnight.
but you're talking about your experience as well, working with dogs
Yeah.
in different parts of the world.
Mhm.
What we see, and what I think is very interesting, is that when we meet, we just had a practical course here in Norway, so we actually met in person, is that dog training in our human relations to the dogs is quite different from the US to Europe, and inside
Yes.
Europe, in Southern Europe and Northern Europe and so on. For example, in Greece, you still have the street dogs, and people seem more relaxed because there are more dogs around you. In Norway, if you have a dog, you're not allowed to come near anywhere where humans eat. It's things like that.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Yeah. So do you have any thoughts on that, and on why? And yeah.
I really don't. I mean, this might not be related to what you're asking, but when I was in Chennai, Madras, India, and I was in a hotel, and just walking down the street near the hotel, there were groups of dogs. One group seemed to be sort of a pack. It seemed like the same dogs were there, every day, but there were some newcomers. And people were saying, oh, stay away from the dogs. They'll bite you. They'll do all these sorts of things. And, I'm no hero, but I walked by the dogs. I had dog treats in my pocket. Within 30 seconds, the dogs became my friends. And over the course of a while I was in that hotel in Madras, in Chennai, everything was fine. So I think what it is too, and this won't be a surprise to any of you, I'm sure, and because I work with a woman in Boulder who's an outstanding dog trainer, positive, force-free. She's, she just knows a whole lot of, she knows a lot about animal behavior. She actually majored in it as an undergraduate at university. It's just dogs are picking up so much information in terms of what we're feeling and what we're thinking, not by only watching us, but smelling us and listening to the tone of our voice. But that's interesting what you said about Norway. I just had no idea.
No, to me, it just feels like my theory is that one of them is that the richer the country, the more spoiled you get, and the more distance you actually get to nature and dogs. And, in Norway, the solution is always to kill the animals if we don't like them. The wolves and the bears, and yeah, it's very sad.
Oh, I totally agree. You don't want me going off in that direction. I love a lot of humans, and I'm sure I would love all of you, but we're not a I don't know. We're a weird species. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay, we have some more questions in the
Sure.
chat. Eva, if you can take
sure.
over. Yeah.
So Ellen's asking, did I hear it correctly? You say let the dogs figure it out themselves when they meet, even if they start a fight. Do you advise not to interfere? And then she says, and in regard of they behave more polite if they feel safe. How does aggression of other dogs have the effect of this feeling safe?
Well, no, yes. So what I said was let them work it out. But one of the reasons it's really important to know about the details of dog behavior is because at some point it might escalate into a fight where one of them could get badly hurt. And like I said, I think I know a lot about dog behavior. I don't know much about dog training. When I've had problems with a couple of the dogs I rescued, I called a local dog trainer and she laughed and said, "You need a dog trainer?" And I went, "I have no idea how to get any particular dog to learn something or unlearn something." But no, I think once again, if you're going to be sort of an ethologist and you're going to watch animals carefully, it may get to the point where you need to step in. But like when you do studies of wild animals, you don't step in. I mean, I've seen some horrific things among wild animals, but I can't step in and stop them because I'm changing the dynamics of the group, and I'm not going to be there all the time. And believe me, I'm a match for a wild coyote or a wolf or cougar or elephant, for example. So there's a lot of faith in that kind of approach. But I don't know. I mean, when I've been at dog parks, especially with dogs I know, if things get pretty nasty, I've always found a way, and their humans have found a way to have the group break up. They'll offer a treat, or they'll throw a tennis ball, or, play tug of war. But what I was saying is that if you can read dog behavior really well, you might be able to tell when what looks to be what might be rough and tumble play or play fighting is sort of on the verge of escalating into a real fight. That's really all I'm saying. But I mean, it's like with humans, it's like with kids. They've got to, kids in the playground have to learn to negotiate their own social relationships because a teacher or a parent or an adult is not always going to be there. And I forgot the second part of the question.
Let me reread it.
Sure.
So yeah, in regard of how they behave, more polite if they feel safe. How does aggression to other dogs affect this feeling safe? I'm not sure I understand. So,
how less aggression?
how does aggression have an effect of this feeling safe?
Oh, I see. Well, I think that the dogs are reading. Yeah, that's a great question. And we've always had to deal with that in our field work, because when you're watching wild coyotes or foxes or wolves, you don't have the opportunity to sometimes to get the details of what's going on. They take off or you don't want to be part of their interactions. But I think dogs will know, on average, I think dogs will know what's going on in their social group faster and more accurately than we ever can. That's just kind of my general feeling. So when I watch groups of dogs or coyotes or packs of wolves, wild animals, that they're exchanging information more rapidly and more subtly than we could ever read. Okay, so we're probably picking up on the generalities of, we see where a tail is or the ears are there vocalizations? Are they, I guess you'd say, ambivalent? Do they approach and withdraw? Or do they circle around and avoid an individual? So one of the things, I just saw a cat go, those cat. So the other thing that I think is really important, and I think it applies to dogs across the board, is these free-ranging feral dogs have the ability to get away from a situation. So even at a dog park, one of the ones around Boulder is really large. So if things get kind of, tense, if you will, or there's uncertainty, a wolf or coyote can just leave the area. The problem with dogs is I don't know, I mean, I have a general idea where you all live, and it might apply to the dogs in Greece too, is that oftentimes something happens because the dog just can't get away. They don't have the freedom of movement or the space. So I've seen, I can't even tell you, probably thousands of times at a dog park or on a running trail, dogs are meeting, it could be 2, it could be 5, and things are beginning to get questionable. And, somebody will say, what do you think's going on? And sometimes I'll just say, I have no idea. But then a dog who looks to be maybe picked on or is a scapegoat just leaves the group, and the other dogs don't follow him or her. They just let him go. So I think that what I've seen around when I've seen groups of dogs in cities or towns, for example, and they have the freedom to move and get away from a situation, that's one way in which the situation could be resolved. I mean, we've all done that, right? I mean, you're with a group of people and you can't wait to get rid of them, so you just leave. I hate to say it that way, but I think that often happens.
Yeah, problem is most of the times that dogs are restricted, and most of the fights dogs get, home dogs, is because of how humans handle them. They are on leash, and we don't know how to manage situations. And yeah, that's the reason why many dogs fight sometimes.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, once again, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, know more than I do. But, I constantly hear, in fact, when I was on my bike ride this morning, I ran into a woman who was a student of mine. And so she really knows a lot about animal behavior and dog behavior. And she rescued a dog a few years ago, a lovely dog. And the dog is, the difference is night and day when the dog has a leash, is on a leash and not on a leash. I mean, you all know this, and I'm sure you deal with this in your training profession. But I think a lot of it has to do with either, probably mainly with the fact that when a dog's on a leash, they're constrained. They can't get away from something, or they can't freely initiate the contact. So what I hear all the time, and I don't know that anybody's ever really done a detailed study of it, is people will say, oh, my dog, when my dog's off leash, they're wonderful, they're friendly. When they're on leash, they're very aggressive or assertive or quote, territorial, because maybe they're defending their human. So I find that to be really interesting. And the one common element there is that when a dog is off leash, they sense they just have more freedom of movement to join an interaction or leave the interaction. I sometimes when I'm with people, I feel like I'm on a leash because it would be improper for me to leave the group, and there's nothing I'd rather do. I mean, they may be nice people, but I have no interest in what they're talking about. But I do think that when you feel constrained, then sometimes your only defense would be to behave aggressively. And you'll see this in wild animals who feel cornered. I mean, I've seen it a lot in wild coyotes and wolves where they're cornered. I mean, maybe they have a vast area in which to take off, but they're cornered in a little space. They feel threatened, they feel unsafe, and they don't trust what's going on. And I do think you can apply the same set of reasons and the same rules of thumb, if you will, to dogs. In fact, I'm sure you can.
Yeah. Okay, so we have some more comments in the chat. Mary was saying in Switzerland, the dogs are trained to be like robots. I do not do that. My dog Gandalf has total agency. I just protect him from danger, and he's really comfortable in all situations. Well, great. Lucky dog, Gandalf. Then we have another comment by Ivo. In dog parks, I see the big problem that as it is fenced, not so small a space, and if some dogs don't feel safe They need space and want to take distance, but they feel pushed into a corner in some points, and there can be fighting. Yeah, this is what you was just saying.
Mm-hmm.
So Evie saying, as an ethologist, can you tell us what do dogs contribute to the ecosystem they live in? No one discusses about this a lot, apart from the companionship they offer, because we have to advocate for their freedom as part of nature, even if they are bred by humans. How can we see them more like this too?
So I'm not quite sure what the question would be. How?
So I'd say we tend to see, I mean, Evie, if you want to intervene, but we tend to see dogs just like human companions. We kind of forget they are species on their own.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, that was the point I was trying to make before, is that, right, I mean, and it's not a criticism, but a lot of people's experiences with dogs are only with, quote, homed dogs, controlled dogs. And they can have wonderful relationships, and the dogs can be happy and the humans can be happy. But that constrained environment doesn't allow dogs to express their entire behavioral repertoire, or the subtleties of the repertoire, or fine-tune their behavior according to the social situation in which they find themselves. So the analogy I make, and I make it in the book, and I'm very careful, is, so we know a lot about the behavior of dogs from laboratory studies, but oftentimes the different studies produce different results. It's not because the science is bad, it's just because they're studying different dogs in different environments, using different rewards, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so I think that if I'm reading this right, I believe one way to give a more constrained dog a better life, once again, is give them as many choices as you can, keep them safe, because, I mean, yeah, if you live in a big city, you can't just let your dog out the front door and say, see you in an hour. But when I lived in the mountains outside of Boulder, I live more in the city now. I had a large number of dogs who I lived with, and there were 4 or 5 houses on the road, and all their dogs came down to my place because I gave them treats, and because they liked one another. I mean, sometimes it would be 4 or 5 dogs, and it would be a little pack of dogs or a little group of dogs, and they'd be free to do whatever they wanted while I was home. When I was gone, I had a big outdoor run that was very safe, from mountain lions and cougars, foxes, coyotes. The point I'm making is that, once again, I could watch them out of the window in my office, and every now and again, they'd sleep near one another. I used to distribute treats all over my property, and they could spend 5 hours looking for treats the size of a marble. I mean, and they had a very enriched life and a very free life, and they were able to, and if there was a conflict, they could solve it by getting away from one another. So with more constrained dogs, I mean, I've said this so many times, and sometimes people say, well, you don't really know what it's like to live with a dog in New York City or Madrid or Athens, well, I don't know what it's like, but I do know people who do live with dogs in those situations, and they really have to work hard to give their dog a high quality, enriched life. My sister, who lives in New York City, once also had this, and all they would say is, well, the more freedom I give the dog and the more I allow the dog to make choices, even if it's in the living room of my house, the happier they seem. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to say it, and I think people make much too big of a deal of how to enrich a dog's life. There's a lot of things you can do to challenge a dog in a positive way, to keep their brain going so they don't become brain dead.
And that's a good, because we got a question in the chat from Mary, which is a good follow-up question. How can we best allow dogs to completely express themselves? Or rather, how can we stop hindering their ability to express themselves?
Well, that would really depend on, where you live and what kind of situation you're in, because I know people, so Boulder's just a town. It's a little city. I mean, I don't care what you call it, but you can't just let your dog outside. There's cars, right? I mean, in West Boulder, right below the mountains, you see, there's a lot of dirt roads. Dogs could run free, but they can't really run that free not because there's a few cars, but there's bears and there's mountain lions, cougars who will eat them. I mean, they're predators. So what I always tell people to do, and I remember working with a friend of mine who lives in New York City, was find a place you can go where the dog can run free and be safe. And if that's not possible, find out what your dog likes to do and let them do it as much as you can and challenge them. But I don't think there's a general answer to that question because it depends on where you live and what the opportunities are. So where I live now, every now and again, I'll see some dogs who I see every day and they're roaming without a leash. And I feel a little uncomfortable because there can be occasional cars, but somehow these dogs have learned that there's a certain area where there's certain areas where they can't go because either the people don't like them or there are cars. But I don't think there's a general answer, challenge your dog, in positive ways. Or just one of my friends just takes her dog out every morning, runs them, lets them go in, places where they can run free. And the dog is so exhausted, they basically sleep all day. But it works. Her dog is a really happy-go-lucky dog.
And we are talking a lot about choices as well, to allow our dogs to make as many choices that we can.
Mm-hmm.
In our everyday lives, to give them more freedom to express themselves and to trust their dog more. Turi Derugos is talking a lot about that we should trust our dogs to make the right decisions for themselves. We are, yeah.
I mean, so oftentimes, I'm sure you've all, maybe not all, but many of you have seen it, is people will force their dogs to interact with another dog. And it's not because, I mean, the dog is making a choice. It may not be because they may not want to interact with a particular dog, not because there's going to be a fight, but they just don't like what they smell like, right? Or they don't like their sounds. So I hear this so much at dog parks and even on the streets of Boulder is, oh, come on, play with one another. And the dog is kind of saying, I don't want to play with them. And the people will really force them. So that's really a loss of freedom, or I know somebody who used to say, well, my dog isn't very friendly and doesn't like other dogs. And I don't criticize people because that's a quick way to get into a fight when you criticize a person's dog. But I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I've seen your dog. I'm not saying this, I'm thinking, I've seen your dog playing with a lot of other dogs. It's your dog is picky. They don't want to play with Joe or Harry or Mary, but they'll play with, John and Kathy. I don't know, whatever the dogs are called. But you're right, Lisbeth. I mean, you need to figure out what a dog really likes to do, and then let them do it. And then, or once again, challenge them in a positive way. Hide food in your hide food in your living room somewhere or do something that really makes them work for food. Yeah.
And as Evie is saying in the chat, I was just going to say the same thing, to respect their individuality, to understand that they're
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I'm sure you all hear this. Like I said, I'm not a trainer, but people will say, they like a certain breed and or they like a certain mix, or they'll go rescue dogs who, supposedly have the same genetic background, and they'll go, oh, they're not like one another. And I'm thinking, of course not. They're individual dogs. I mean, one of the things when we studied coyotes that was really instructive, I mean, I'd seen it before, and I've seen it in young wild wolves, is when the coyotes come out of a den or the wolves come out of a den when they're about 3 weeks old, they're as distinct they're very distinct individuals. They're shy individuals, bold individuals. Some of them are just so obnoxious, you hope you never see them again. You don't wish them bad, but they come out of the den just ready to go. But my field assistants, some of my students were astounded. You get these little balls of fur coming out of a den, the same hole in the ground, the same mommy, the same father, and they're really different. So and that's another major message of Dogs Demystified, is dogs are individuals. So you need to know who they are, learn who they are, and honor that individuality. So people will say, well, all my dogs used to like to do, go to the dog park, or all my dogs used to like peanut butter, and now this one doesn't. What's wrong with them? And I'm going, there's nothing wrong with them. They're just individual dogs.
And that's what we're trying to do at Nordic Dog Trainer. We call ourselves dog trainers, and the courses are called dog training because that's what people are used to hearing. But what we want to teach people is basically how to coexist with your dog as your best friend. But I haven't found a different title or word for it. It's very difficult to explain, but yet so easy for me in my head. I want people to be more relaxed around dogs. Just appreciate them the way they are, and not, we're not about obedience training or anything like that. But Alice is writing, we are dog educators. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I really like the phrase in English, dog teachers or dog educators. And give them as many freedoms as you can. Sometimes it's inconvenient. There's dog appropriate behaviors and dog inappropriate behaviors. I mean, dogs like sniffing poop or pee. They'll mount one another, they'll hump one another. Well, that's just what dogs do.
Yeah.
And I had this interesting thing. I just wrote a piece for Psychology Today, because I write about why dogs mount and hump. And I understand that that's not an appropriate behavior in some contexts, and I was walking down the streets of Boulder about 2 months ago, and I say hello to all the dogs, and a lot of the people, in a lot of ways, I prefer the dogs to the people, but that's okay. I have the freedom to do that. And so this woman was walking down the street with a dog. I didn't know either of them. And it was clear the dog was a happy dog. And the dog was actually on a very long lead. The dog had freedom to pee and, sniff whatever and do whatever dogs do walking down the streets of Boulder. It was early in the morning, and the dog came up to me and sniffed me and jumped on my leg. And the woman went crazy. And I just said to the dog, I wish you wouldn't do that. The dog actually stopped. So she was really apologetic. So I said, well, that's okay. That's what dogs do. And I didn't mean it I meant it in a really serious way. That's part of what being a dog is. And in my book, Canine Confidential, I started the book with a whole lot of different stories about different dogs and you know, where they'll put their noses in places where people wish they wouldn't. Well, that's okay. So just say no, or just, I don't mean push them away, you know, just say no and just put your hand down or something like that.
Yeah.
But, you know, when you think about it, there's a lot of dog behaviors that really are part of being a dog that don't work in a dog-human world. They just don't work.
Yeah.
You know, so I can understand why people don't want dogs, you know, running up to them and jumping on their leg or something like that. Whatever, just do whatever you want. However, there's a couple of years ago, I was just walking up the street to get a coffee, and there was a woman with a dog. Once again, I didn't know the woman or the dog, and the dog was sniffing and sniffing and sniffing. And about 5 minutes later, when I walked by, they were in the same spot. I don't know if they left, but the dog was still sniffing. So I said, wow, that's really great. You allow your dog to be a dog and sniff. And she just turned around and said, exactly. This walk is there to walk. She said, I would rather keep running or walking, but if my dog stops to sniff, I'll let him sniff for a minute or two. I mean, or whatever.
Yeah.
So I said, well, that's really great. And without, I don't think she knew me, and I didn't know her nor her dog, but she said, look, this walk is for the dog. And if the dog wants to sniff, let him sniff. And then she said, well, at some point I've got to get home and go to work. but her dog just seems so content, you know, and so when I lived in the mountains, I could open the door. I mean, when it was dark, I had to be careful because maybe there were animals around who could harm the dogs. But in general, I could open the dog for my dog or dogs, depending on how many dogs I lived with. And at some point, other dogs would be coming down the road to say hello and sniff one another and probably just go back to sleep. But they always had the freedom.
Yeah.
And I remember that as some of my dogs got older, and some of them were limping, and they were just they were old dogs. I gave them a choice. I was on pretty much the same time schedule. I get up really early, and I feed them, and I'd have some breakfast, and I'd take them down the road there was a lovely bike path below my house, and we could walk all the way to Boulder, which was like, 7 or 8 kilometers. And I would let them decide what they wanted to do. And there were some days where they'd go outside and just go back asleep. So I would say to them, you got an hour. You can do whatever you want. And I'm sure they had no idea what I was saying. But I decided that they should just be able to choose what they want to do. At some point in their doggy brain, they knew that I was going to come home and their friends would come down. And if I was leaving, I would put them in this big outdoor run. And if I wasn't leaving, that they could do whatever they want. And most of the time, they just went to sleep in front of my office. But I really, really believe, like I said before, and I really believe it's true in humans, that if you feel that you have more freedom to just express your individuality, you're just going to be a happier dog or a happier cat or a happier human. The problem is that a lot of people, and like, once again, you all probably know this because of what you do to educate people and dogs, is a good number of people, I don't know how many or what percentage, get dogs because the people are control freaks. Mm-hmm. They don't realize it, but the dog fills some kind of need they have to control an other living sentient being. And then among the people I know, most of my friends are not control freaks, but some are more than others. And I don't mean even that in a negative way. I think the people who just say, yeah, I have a friend who lives in the mountains. She has a dog named Annie. Annie has a really great free life. Sometimes Annie they actually live not far from where I did. But she has to watch, or the family has to watch Annie, because there are mountain lions or cougars around, and they will eat dogs. I mean, they just do. They're natural born predators. But Annie's just got the best disposition, or a great disposition. She knows she can go out, and she knows if she's called home, there's a reason, and maybe the only reason she can say is, well, when the humans I live with call me home, there might be danger. But I actually think Annie, with her nose and her ears and her eyes, is picking up the fact that there might be an animal out there, like a mountain lion or a coyote, or even a fox, who could harm them. And I don't know how you would translate that in your profession. Yeah.
We have seen, and I have seen for the past 12 years I've been doing this, that a lot of the owners come to us when they have problems with their dogs. So it's behavior problems. And just the small things, giving dogs more choice. And this one very easy thing to do, which all our students have to do as well, is that they have to walk their dog slowly, and they have to stop when the dog is stopping to sniff.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to wait until the dog is finished sniffing. And just doing that instead of their usual walks, a lot of people, they come back and say, you know what? Less problem behavior.
Yeah.
And it's kind of makes sense, doesn't it?
I mean, my general feeling in life is nobody likes to be told what to do all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'm told what to do and I just have to do it. And I may say to somebody, please do this, because it's just what I think would be the best thing to do at the moment. But yeah, and I really honestly believe what I was saying before is true, that among wild animals or free-ranging dogs, they don't feel this limit on them. They don't feel like they have a choke chain on their neck, if you will, or, something, a tether that's really controlling them. So they just feel like, okay, most of the time I can be who I am, but sometimes I'm not allowed to be. And I trust the human. They don't know we're humans. I trust that other mammal who's controlling my life, or with whom I'm living, to have my best interests in mind. I really feel that. I mean, I really feel that there's that element of trust and safety. So if somebody says to me, Mark, don't do that, or maybe it's not a good idea to do that, it's the manner in which it's said, and also my assessment of the context. Sometimes you just have to do things you might not want to do, but if you really trust that another individual has your best interests in mind, then you just do it. And I really think that somebody said, well, that's just attributing, I don't know, too high a level of cognitive capacity to the dog. I don't think it is at all. I mean, they're social beings. They come from wolves who live in social packs where there are very, very defined rules of social regulation.
Yeah.
But a rule of social regulation doesn't mean it's a control thing. It just means that this is the best thing to do. I don't know. I mean, I think you all get it. I mean, but some people I know who get dogs, and they're lovely people, and I never say it, and I always say, God, I'm glad I'm not your dog. I mean, I don't even know. I mean, it sounds nasty, but it's not really meaning to be nasty. It's just like, you're just a little too control freaky for me. Yeah.
And COVID was definitely not a good time for dogs. A lot of people that shouldn't have dogs, they got dogs, and look where we are now.
But let me say, I know I only have a few more minutes, but let me just say that I think, on the other hand, COVID for certain dogs was a good time. So I was getting emails from people, including somebody in Boulder who's a physicist, teaches at the university, spends a lot of time in his lab. He couldn't go into the lab. So he read actually one of my books. I think he read Canine Confidential. And he said, wow, he said, I don't like COVID, and I'm sorry COVID is here, but I've gotten to know my dog better because I'm home all the time. So I really appreciated that. You know, he said, I mean, this guy's a bright guy, and he wasn't abusing his dog. He just said, he had more time to take him on runs in the trails around Boulder. And he had more times, he actually, because he's a scientist, he said, what should I do? And I said, make an ethogram of your dog's behavior and look at your dog's activity patterns. And he wasn't beating his dog and he was a good human, but the outcome of being home all the time was he learned who his dog, actually I got another dog. And one of the first things that he observed was that a dog isn't a dog isn't a dog, as we would say in English. His dogs were radically different, although they had a lot of similarities, genetically. So,
Yeah.
so I do agree. On the other hand, I think COVID was negative because people were stuck at home and they felt their dogs were being too demanding. And I said, would you like to define too demanding? Is it because you were home and they really wanted to just snuggle up with you or lay down at your feet? So yeah, but it was a good time for people to become dog ethologists.
Yeah, true. Okay, Mark, we'll let you go. Is there any
that's okay.
final?
Is there any out? I was just going to, well, first of all, I was going to thank you all. Second of all, some of you, I think, just by looking at names, I have a group that I just call it my dog group, to whom I send things when they come out. If you want to be added to my dog group, just send me an email and I'll add your name to my dog group. It's nothing magical. I just paste your name into a list of.
But you know what I'll do, Mark? I'll copy paste your email address and I put it in the email where I send the recording to everyone. So those of you who want to be added to the email list, you can do that when you get.
Yeah, and just say, please add me to your dog group.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I highly recommend it, by the way.
Are you on it?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I lose track of who's on it. I just add names and send it out. No, that's great. And I really appreciate being on this part of this group. I mean, I think that, I don't know. I mean, the more we respect dogs for who they are and their individuality, I think the happier they will be. And the happier they are, the happier you will be. and you won't, I mean, I just tell people, you might say my dog is too demanding. Well, I know people who are far more demanding than dogs. And, but if you're living with a dog, you've made that choice, and the other message I give to a lot of people, but once again, it won't be foreign to you all, is, taking a dog into your house and your heart is a huge commitment. Time, energy, money. And I think it's just really, really important to realize you don't have to do that. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but every now and again, I've gotten grief from some people when somebody would write to me and say, especially with first-time dog guardians, I've never had a dog and I want to get a dog. What do you think? And the first thing I say is, assess your life.
Yeah.
Are you ready to give up some of your freedom? Because you are going to give up some of your freedom, and sometimes they'll just write back and say, well, I've got a demanding job. I've got a family. I've got whatever else is going on in their lives. And they'll say, I just don't have the time to take a dog. But then they'll get pressure, maybe from a shelter, from a rescue center, from a foster, place where they foster out dogs. And I'll say, and I really mean this, I said, if you decide that your life isn't ready now, if you're not ready for a dog now, don't get a dog. Because the worst thing you can do is bring the dog home. You're going to fall in love with them, likely. They'll fall in love with you, likely. And you may just decide, I can't do it because my job's too demanding, my family's too demanding, or whatever it is, or I can't afford it financially, or I like to go off and run a hike and do things where a dog can't go. So I wanted to stress that to you all. I mean, I know you know this, but I don't know how many. Like the woman who I work with in Boulder a lot, the great dog trainer, people will ask her about getting a dog because they realize that they'll need a dog, you know. The other is, even for people who have lived with dogs, because dogs are individuals, you know, maybe you had a long-term relationship with a dog or dogs, and it was, quote, easy for both of you or all of you. But getting a new dog, there's no guarantee. And so I
Mary
think,
is writing that she waited, I waited 25 years till my life was able to have a dog. 25 years.
well, when I moved down to Boulder, we had a flood here, and about, it was 11 years ago, and I did not, and I love where I live in Boulder now, but I lived in the mountains. I just decided I don't want to be in a situation where I have to walk a dog or put a dog in my car and drive him or her to the dog park. I have plenty of dogs in my life down here, you know, but that was a hard decision for me because I had dogs all over the place for years. I mean, not only mine, but my neighborhood dogs, or every now and again, I'd go outside and I'd be looking for, quote, my dogs, and they weren't there, but my neighbor would call or text me or something and say, oh, by the way, you know, if you're looking for Sasha or Anoka Jethro, they're sleeping on the porch with Zoe, who was his dog. So they would just have these round robin slumber parties, I get, you know, or they would just join one another. But I really did make the conscious decision when I moved to Boulder that I would not be able to give. I mean, I think if I had a dog now, they'd have a pretty good life because I like to spoil dogs, and I'm really sensitive to their needs. But I felt that I could not do it. You know what I mean? I just couldn't just open the door to my condo and just let them out, although I could, because there's a walkway where they couldn't go anywhere. So for 2 years, my neighbor had a dog, and it was like my dog, because the dog would just run up and down the walkway. And, you know, sometimes he'd poop on my deck, and I'd just say, Jack, you got to clean the poop up. And Jack said, fine. But in all honesty, over the course of a couple of weeks, his dog just had a change in personality. Really happy dog. Dog could run out, be outside, and get the stimulation of the squirrels and the birds, you know. But I do use myself as an example because for a long time I missed having a dog or dog companions. But I think, you know, I mean, I always say to the trainers, I know I don't know what the word, how to say it, you know, but you're seeing the result of a lot of times a person unable to give the dog the high quality life they want the dog to have, which is good. They recognize it, you know. So I feel it's perfectly okay to tell somebody, it's like, don't get a dog, don't have a kid, don't do this, but because you're not ready.
Wow, we could go on for the rest of the evening.
Oh, this is so much fun. Well, it's only lunchtime here for me, and I don't see anybody bringing me lunch. But yeah, really, stay in touch with me. I mean, really, I just love I love talking with people like you, because you're really, you know, you're the middle person, you know, the middle man, middle woman, between like a dog and their human. And you'd hope that when people are asking you to educate their dog, it's because they want to give the dog a better, a better life than they have. So, yeah.
And I just want to end with one comment from Evie. She said, it's so important to have scientists with a kind heart.
Oh, well, that's nice. Thank you, Evie. A lot of my colleagues don't necessarily agree, but I don't really care what they think.
Neither do ours.
You're right. Well, you know, yeah, no, I do appreciate that. I mean, my general attitude is it costs a lot. I don't mean money, but it costs a lot less to be, quote, nice and compassionate than to be an arrogant bastard. So, you know, I mean, I just really feel that way. And it costs a lot. You know, I like what Evie said, not personally only, but but really what Evie said sort of is an easy way to cash out. In the end, it costs a lot less. It could be money for a trainer. It could be the anguish you have by living with a dog or a cat or another, being who's not happy. But it costs a lot less to be nice than to be dominating or nasty. It really does. And I think that in terms of living with a dog, I mean, it could be the same with a cat. I love cats. I'm just allergic to probably every cat in the world. But if I weren't, I would definitely have cats. It just costs less, I mean, if you try to understand what your dog or dogs need as the individuals they are, and you work on it, it makes for an easier life for you, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think it does. I mean, like I said, I mean, every now and again when the dogs who I were at my house, my own dogs and other dogs were at my house, and they'd really piss me off. They'd really make me angry. And I'd say, what are you doing? I mean, you've got the best dog life in the world. And they would just turn around and go to sleep. And then when they woke up, there were treats all over for them.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that maybe we can do this again, but I have people write to me and say, well, you shouldn't use food as a reward because the dog only wants the food, not you. And I always say, I'm not a human psychologist, but that's your problem, not your dog's problem. So anyway, thank you all. This is great. Let's do this again. I love these kinds of conversations because I deal with people who are so neurotic about their dogs. And I just say, just let your dog be your dog. I know. So
and we can learn
anyway.
so much from each other as well. So I will invite you again soon, Marc, definitely.
Great. And I'd love to share this. And if you want to be added to my doggy group, let me know and we'll go from there. And I think Eva, you're going to write this, you're going to send me something. I can't remember.
I will. Yeah.
Okay, fine. Well, thank you all. Thank you, Lisbeth.
Thank you, everyone. And
take
Marc,
care of your health. Have a good weekend and we'll go from there.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.